Um, Lawrence Yufa, you are you're in school to become a Bible scholar, right? You're a good way along there, are you?
Yeah. So essentially, right now, I am going to UW Milwaukee for religious studies. But after that, hopefully, I can get accepted into like UNC or something because they have a very good biblical studies program. In
Now,
fact, I think that's
along
where
the
my
way,
roommate teaches.
I unmuted the microphone just in time for the fucking dog to go off. Uh, Shut up! Damn it! So, um, what was I going to say? Oh, part of the along the way, this involved you learning Koine Greek and learning. You learned another language besides that, didn't you?
No. So I have learned basically all of ancient Greek because not just Koine, Ionic, Doric. They don't really change all that much. There are like a few things that change from dialect to dialect, but those just kind of go along with learning the language itself.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, Koine is included in that, and
Okay.
Koine is a hell of a lot easier than something like Attic or Ionic. Ionic's actually very hard. So
Yeah, I remember when we do the Blasphemers Bible, we have the advantage of having like three people who speak Hebrew, and then we have you who have the ancient Greek, and then sometimes we have somebody on that can do even Aramaic and older. So apologize for getting those confused. Now on the thing about Psalm 14, what is so irritating about the way that I'd normally hear this presented, the fool says in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. Their deeds are vile. There is no one who does good. Now, that's typically taken to refer to atheists. And I have problems with this, one of them being that there is not one atheist who does good. Seriously?
right, yeah. So the biggest issue is so Christians often quote Psalm 14:1a. So that's just the first part of that. They quote, "The fool has said in his heart, there is no God." So to imply that atheists are fools. However, if we do a close analysis of the word fool as used in Psalms, we find that the psalmist isn't talking about atheists. They usually leave out the second half of the verse because they know that part, at least in my own experience, they leave that part out because they know it isn't true, because they know that there are plenty of atheists who do plenty of good. But yeah, it's certainly not talking about atheists, and I have written quite a few things on it to I did quite a detailed study to to demonstrate that, and the this required rereading Psalms, which was not fun. It was in fact the opposite of fun. It was torturous in many ways because they get very repetitive. But the advantage to being repetitive is you get a lot of good ideas about what certain words mean.
So when it says, that there is no God, they're talking about somebody who says there is no God. Now, if that's not an atheist, who the hell is it?
Well, let me tell you. So, uh, so firstly, we can even assume for the sake of argument that no atheist does good. It'd still be a misuse of the verse. So the question is, how does the psalmist understand the fool? So it should be noted here that there's no singular psalmist. There are many attributed authors of many psalms. They were written over a long period of time and were eventually compiled together into the modern book of Psalms. There's an internal division of the five books within Psalms itself, but that was done later to emulate the Torah. It's usually impossible to know when a specific psalm was written or by whom because they very rarely contain concrete historical information. So, but to keep it simple, like we can look at the psalms as a whole. So yeah, so what do we learn about these people who say that there is no God, right? So they are corrupt, their deeds are vile, there is none that does good. But let's continue on. They are called evildoers in verse 4, who frustrate the plans of the poor in verse 6. They refuse to pray and don't seek God. On the face of it, a cynical believer could still accept this chapter is talking about atheists. However, we need to take a look at the rest of the book to figure out, what they're talking about.
I
In
mean,
my
I've
view,
certainly seen atheists misrepresented as being, evil and not doing good and, up to
sure.
no good and so forth. And of course, we don't seek God. Why would we?
Right, yeah, but there's a lot that goes into this. So the reason that the word fool is used, and this is my own kind of hypothesis. I ran it past another biblical scholar friend of mine, and she was like, "Wow, this is pretty interesting. Hadn't considered that parallel." So in my view, the fools in chapter 14 are to be contrasted with the wise of chapter 15. So while wise is not used in the chapter, God is said to search for the wise in 14:2. The attributes are paralleled very nicely. So in chapter 15, we're told that the wise are the ones who walk uprightly instead of being corrupt. They do what is right instead of doing evil deeds. They don't do harm to their neighbors instead of frustrating the plans of the poor. Their identification as being the ones who can come worship in the temple in verse 1 is juxtaposed with the fact that the fools refuse to pray. So, considering the parallels, we can determine that the fool language is just a framing device. It's literary parallelism, but more more so, the fool is more generally identifiable with another group, that being the wicked. So the wicked pop up everywhere in Psalms as they are the main opponents of Psalms, and there are plenty of things in the Psalms that describe the wicked. And interestingly, they share a lot of the same parallels as you would find for the fool. So how do we know that the fools here are to be identified with the wicked? So the most obvious proof is in Psalm 28:3, where the psalmist directly equates the wicked. And thank you Tomer and Isaac for the Hebrew help here. So where the psalmist directly equates the wicked, the reshaim, with the evildoers, using the same word describing the fool in 14:4, po ale aven. There's another identification of these two groups if we consider that the wicked are described as evildoers in Psalm 64:2. Furthermore, their actions are their actions are described in virtually the same way. Continuing in Psalm 28, we see that they too make plans against their neighbors, however they're nice to their face. All their deeds are said to be evil in 28:4. Outside these, the psalmist says the wicked are too proud to seek God in Psalm 10, verse 4. They say, there is no God. They are described as liars who threaten violence. They speak crooked words and cause mischief and refuse to do good in Psalm 36. There is seemingly no end to these connections. In Psalm 26, the wicked are further equated with evildoers. They are and are said to not only plan evil schemes but also take bribes. And we can contrast the taking bribes part with the fact that the wise one of Psalm 15 does not take bribes against the innocent in verse 5. So in Psalm 14, the fool has said in his heart there is no God, but in Psalm 36, sin talks to the wicked in their hearts. So it's very clearly they're very clearly describing this other group called the wicked, and fool is just another descriptor of them. One of the big interesting points that I thought would to make is the idea of plans against the poor. Sometimes it's translated as plans against the oppressed. In any case, these plans are described variously throughout the Psalms. There's a description of them in Psalm 7. They sharpen their swords and prepare bows. They conceive evil and give birth to lies. Importantly, though, their plans backfire when they dig a pit and fall into it, or when their harm will return upon their heads. So in their plans, they just backfire. They try to do something evil, and instead it goes back on them, and they are the ones that have to suffer because they're dicks. So the same motif can also be applied to the nations. The nations, specifically here in Psalm 9:15, they are said to sink down into the pit which they have made. So the nations is a traditional epithet for the enemies of Israel. It's similar to the 9 bows of ancient Egypt, and I'm kind of unsure about the identification of them being the nations, but I will go into a little bit more here. So in Psalm 10, the wicked are said to lurk in ambush. They believe that God isn't taking notice of the things that they do and think he'll never judge them. The section ends with the statement that the nations have perished, which would be another identifying factor. It would be a strange addition about so this would be a strange addition if the passages about the wicked were completely separated from the idea that the nations have perished. But we've kind of seen interpolations before, so it's not necessarily the biggest issue. So if we link the wicked as a polemical title for the nations, then it could mean that the psalmist's opponents are just the nations. But so since we've already shown that the fool is a description of the wicked, this would mean that the fools cannot be identified as atheists, since no nation of the time was atheistic. In fact, there was a book written that was just about atheism in the ancient world and whether or not it existed at all. But they were definitely not Yahwists. Their pantheon didn't include the deity of Israel, which means that the verse in Psalm 14 may be speaking of those that don't accept Yahweh, not any god more generally. In Psalm 79, the nations ask the same thing: where is their God? But I'm still unsure about the identification of the nations here. A more significant psalm for the discussion is Psalm 50. In this psalm, God says to the wicked, "What right do you have to declare my statutes or take my covenant in your mouth?" So he scolds the wicked for not following his laws in verses 16 through 21. The implication of these verses is that the wicked pretend to believe, but don't take it to heart. They pray and talk about the law, but don't actually follow it. So it would align closely with their description in Psalm 26 as hypocrites in verses 4 through 5. So it's not describing a group of non-believers, though it stands against the hypothesis that the wicked are to be equated with the nations. So it shows that the wicked are people who go through the motions of genuine belief, but don't follow the law in their daily lives. But in any case, they're not atheists. There is sorry, go ahead.
In the footnotes, when on Bible Gateway, it says that in Psalm 14:1 that the Hebrew words rendered fool in Psalms denote one who is morally deficient. So that we all understand, I think, that in English that a fool is one who too readily believes improbable claims from questionable sources on insufficient evidence and is thus easily fooled. Which the argument that I always make about this chapter is that that it's no surprise that the Bible and the Quran both use the opposite definition from common parlance, but this implies, the footnotes here imply, that the word is not even fool to begin with, that it's an immoral person, what you're describing as wicked.
Right. Well, the thing is, the word itself that's used, and I'll just quickly skip to my section where I describe that.
Yeah, and I have to mention wicked too, because another thing that the Bible seems to do along with the Quran is describe unbelief as wickedness. That they are synonymous. That if you do good, you believe. To believe is to do good, and to disbelieve is to do evil. At least according to the Quran.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, when it comes to biblical texts, at least for the Psalms, it's not that simple. They had different words that have been variously translated as fool. In fact, in the Septuagint, the earliest Greek translation of the Bible, they also change them up because they had different understandings of fool and all the different words that were used for it. So one of the Psalms to consider here is Psalm 94. So in this psalm, the wicked are said to be boastful and arrogant. And once again, a pit is dug for them in verse 13, just as I mentioned before. Importantly, they are called fools here. So in 94:8, the psalmist urges them to understand and asks the fools when they will be wise. A few things come to mind from the stuff I already discussed. Firstly, we once again have a contrast between the fools and the wise, following the mold of Psalms 14 and 15. Second, there's the fact that the Hebrew translated as fool is different than the word translated as fool here in Psalm 94 is different than the word translated as fool in Psalm 14. In Psalm 14, the word is kaval, which carries a malicious intent to it and can be translated as villain even. The person is stupid in a malicious way. In Psalm 94, the word is kesilim, which carries the connotation of stupidity in the way an ignorant or idiotic person is just stupid. They just don't know any better. But yeah, there are plenty of different words that are used, or I think there are at least three different words that are used that can be translated as fool. But the fact is clear: nowhere in the Psalms are atheists called fools. They're not even in the mind of the psalmist. Fool, evildoer, uh, they're all epithets for the wicked who participate in practices of worship but don't truly put their stakes in it. They waver too easily and are not steadfast in their conviction. They also pressure the pious into following their ways. So the idea that the psalm,
So are these believers that are in the like no true Christian category?
well, these would be more of the people who like go do their services and stuff, but they don't like
The
out in their,
non-zealots, the ones that are too
yeah,
moderate, say.
yeah, essentially. There we go. Yeah, but yeah, the idea that Psalm 14 refers to atheists is a misuse of the psalm. And what I really suggest to Christians is that they stop quoting it at atheists, lest they think they're wise. So the thing is, context is very important. And as a person who's pursuing biblical scholarship, like it's important to me, and it should be important to Christians because I don't think they want to misrepresent the Bible. Um, the thing is, even conservative scholars agree with me on this. Ben Witherington III, he's an evangelical scholar. He notes that the double-minded, which is another phrase that is used for them in what is it, Psalm 117? Yeah. So in Psalm 117, it's a very long acrostic poem. It has another reference, although it's very indirect in the 15th stanza, so verses 113 to 120. The psalmist laments that the evildoers are attempting to have them stray from the path of righteousness. The evildoers must leave so he can comply with God's commands. They are deceitful and stray from his statutes. These evildoers are introduced as being double-minded, and being double-minded means you're conflicted or confused or even hypocritical. Not only would this align with the description of the wicked being hypocritical, or being hypocritical people who say one thing and act another way, it also appears as the main cause of transgressions in the Shepherd of Hermas, which is a non-canonical book, which we just finished reading on Friday Apocryphal Podcast on my channel. But as Ben Witherington notes, and remember what I said here, he's a conservative scholar, he's an evangelical scholar. He notes that double-minded seems to mean someone who appears to be following God's way but really isn't, perhaps someone who is skeptical or has doubts. Nahum Sarna says that he says the conviction of the psalmist is that people act wickedly because they do not believe in divine supervision over human society. This is practical, not philosophical atheism. So this kind of goes back to what I was talking about, they ask where God is or where's their God, or they say that, God isn't paying attention to what they do. So it's not philosophical atheism. Robert Alter, in his monumental work on the Hebrew Bible, notes that the thrust of this line, that being 14:1, is more moral than theological. The concern is not a philosophical question of God's existence, but the scoundrels, or he translates it as scoundrels, but read fools there. But the fool's lack of conscience, his feeling that he can act with impunity, he thinks he need not fear divine retribution. So this conclusion is more strongly supported when we, when we consider the fact that they always ask where God is, or say he can't see what we're doing, or he doesn't care. It's even more strongly supported that way.
So let me ask for a clarification then. So one of your references says that this is practical atheism, not philosophical atheism. So it is talking about atheism in a sense, but what is the difference between a practical atheist and a philosophical atheist?
So in the ancient world, it wouldn't have had even a distinction like that. Like that's a complete, it's an anachronistic thing. So we're looking back at it with our own models of how things work and how philosophy is. But at the time, this would simply mean someone who would go through the motions of belief but not take the teachings to heart in their day-to-day lives. They would go to temple and worship and pray, but then they'd go out and they would have like
This is the way that Christians would describe. Excuse me, damn dogs! Do not have fighting games under me while I'm recording. Puppies. Anyway, this is the way that Christians would describe fellow Christians who are in the flesh or of the world.
yeah, essentially, I would say that.
Okay.
So interestingly, and I kind of want to throw this in here because it was super cool reading about this. So there's a virtual carbon copy of Psalm 14. So that's Psalm 53. It's like if you pull it up right now and do like a parallel thing, it starts off in exactly the same way. But there's a good reason for that duplication. So the Eloistic Psalter, as it has come to be known, is the collection of psalms from 42 to 83. According to Zioni Zevit, a biblical scholar, Elohim is used as the name of God 210 times in this section. The rest of the psalms only use it 94 times. It more than doubles the usage in a third of the size. The method, but I guess it would be half the size technically. The method, and this is quoting from Zioni Zevit's book, the method by which it evolved may be discernible through a comparison of psalms or psalmodic fragments that occur twice, once outside and once within the Eloistic collection. Thus, Psalm 14 is repeated as Psalm 53. So Psalm 14, 2, 4, and 7 employ the name Yahweh, while 53, 3, 5, and 7 use Elohim. There are other examples of this phenomenon as well, but I really suggest, or actually Zevit argues that where Elohim functions as a divine name in the Psalms, it replaced a divine name other than Yahweh. That's essentially his argument. So they're both entirely plausible explanations, but I suggest people read his book, The Religions of Ancient Israel.
Okay, I don't know that I have any other questions.
All right, yeah. So there's also, I don't know if you wanted to talk about it, the whole thing in Matthew where he is where Jesus says, you shouldn't call people fools.
Yeah, let's do touch on that since you brought it up, because I understand that there's somewhere else where actually Jesus does call somebody a fool.
Yep, Matthew 23:17. Yeah.
Yeah, but is that you're doing the Greek, and this is written in Greek now. Is the word he's using there in both places fool?
So the way that it's translated in the Septuagint text, at least for 14:1, Psalm 14:1, the word that's translated in the Septuagint is aphrones, but the word that Jesus uses is more. So I did a translation here, and the thing is, there's no such thing as a perfect translation, but it's often Matthew 5:22 where Jesus says this. It's often translated as whoever says to his brother, or whoever says or calls someone fool, he will be subject to the Gehenna of fire. That's usually how it's translated, right? But there is a Greek grammatical quirk here. So so the way I translate it is, but I say to you that everyone that is angry at his brother will be subject to the judgment. But should he say to his brother Raka, or actually it should be pronounced Raka, he will be subject to the Sanhedrin. But should he say fool, he will be subject to the Gehenna of fire. So the word that's translated as whoever, it's hos. So hos is it shouldn't be translated as whoever. It's a definite relative pronoun and refers back to the previous singular nominative. And in the Greek, the previous singular nominative would be, and I don't want to mispronounce this, so it would be ho orgizomenos. Hor orgizomenos. So the ho is the, and then orgizomenos would be the one being angry, or altogether, I should say, it's the one being angry. So because it refers, in that second section, because Hus refers back to the last thing, it is only talking about people who are angry at their brothers, rather than this blanket statement of you shouldn't call people fools.
Okay. I wish that I had something more that I could discuss. I've been doing the most of this on mute because the dogs have been going berserk until about this moment.
Although it is
Fucking
interesting.
awkward.
So in where he does call someone a fool, it could be argued that they're not his brothers, because he's talking about his opponents. But then you get to the idea that Matthew is as a text is it emphasizes the importance of preaching and spreading the word. So it could be argued either way, but the idea. So he uses the same word that he uses in the Greek here. He says moroi, which is just the plural of fools there. Uh, but it's still not the same word that's used in 14:1, but in Psalm 14:1. But it wouldn't exactly be a contradiction, because he's not talking about his brothers, I guess. And furthermore, I think the point of 522 was about the finality of God's judgment over people's judgment. And I mean, I've written like half an argument for that, but
Well, I know of a couple of places in the Bible and the Quran where it warns against, the believers condemning, anybody for anything, and that you're not. So that the kind of comments that we get in social media all the time from our believing friends, condemning us to hell and telling us how stupid we are, and they're in violation of their own. So not commandments. I guess, where is it to commandment? I don't know.
well, the whole wait, which commandments? What? They tell us that we're in violation of a whole bunch of stuff, but we just don't follow it at all. So
All right. Well, Lawrence, thank you very much for that. I very much appreciate having you on the Blasphemers Bible. And I think, well, I'll just leave it there. Thank you, sir.
yeah, I appreciate you having me on. And I actually, when writing this, I had a lot of pages of notes written out, like handwritten, but they were all so disparate. Like I needed to put them together to actually make sense of it all, right? So I wrote about was it 3 pages on just the Psalms, and then I started doing an analysis of Matthew's use of the word fool, and that's going to transform into something else entirely. So I've actually, once I finish this, at some point I'll either release it as a video or actually try to get it published in a peer-reviewed journal.
By the way, did we ever cover what is the difference between a practical and a philosophical atheist?
Oh yeah, I mean, philosophical atheist is like us. Like we straight up do not believe in this stuff. But a practical atheist in the ancient world would be someone who pretended like they believed, but really didn't take those practices to heart. They would, they would eschew the commandments when it suited their needs. So.
I kind of think that that's really most believers. I mean, and they use the excuse that they didn't, that they have moments of weakness where they're in the world or in the flesh or whatever, and then, but really you're just trying to get about your life, and you want to play the game, you want to be socially acceptable, but you can't keep up the make believe all the time. All right, thanks again, Lawrence.
Yeah, thank you, appreciate it.